Have you ever had that strange, gnawing feeling in the pit of your stomach that tells you something just isn't right, even when everything on the surface looks perfectly fine? That quiet little voice in the back of your head that whispers at night when you're trying to fall asleep. Asterisk, something is off here, you're being lied to. Asterisk, if you've ever felt that, then you already know the state of mind I was in when this story began. And let me promise you this, by the time we get to the end of this video, you're going to have the exact answer you came here for. I'll tell you what I found, I'll tell you why my wife was hiding her phone for months, and I'll tell you what happened the night I synced her cloud. But right now, I need you to sit with me in this moment because to understand the answer, you need to understand the silence, the little lies, the shadows between us that started so small I almost convinced myself they didn't matter. Almost. When you live with someone you love, when you marry them, you expect transparency. You expect that intimacy will bring openness, not secrecy. But here's where things started to unravel for me. I began noticing my wife keeping her phone in strange places. Not just on the counter or plugged in by the nightstand, but tucked under pillows, slid between couch cushions, even left in the locked glove compartment of her car. At first I brushed it off. Who hasn't put their phone in odd spots before? But what gnawed at me was the way she reacted when I reached for it, even just to hand it to her. It wasn't the casual, "Oh thanks," you'd expect from a spouse. It was sharp, almost panicked, like I had caught her holding something poisonous. And let me ask you, if that happened to you, wouldn't your mind start racing too? Wouldn't you start wondering what was worth guarding so desperately? Now, I know some of you watching this have probably been through something similar, where someone close to you suddenly grows distant, guarded, and you can't quite put your finger on why. That's the connection I want to make with you right now. Because this isn't just my story, it's a reflection of the very human fear we all share. The fear of betrayal, the fear that someone we trust with our whole heart might be living a secret life right under our nose. And that's exactly why I'm taking you on this journey. Because I know what it feels like to be in the dark, searching for answers that don't come easy. But trust me, in this video you're going to get the answer. That's my promise to you, so stay with me until the very last second, because the twist I uncovered is not what you're expecting. Things escalated gradually. My wife would step out of the room to take calls. She started sleeping with her phone under her pillow. If a notification buzzed while she was in the shower, she would rush out, dripping wet, just to check it. I told myself I was imagining things, but you can only ignore red flags for so long before they become neon signs flashing in your face. And when I finally decided to act, I realized the only way to get the truth wasn't through confrontation. It was through patience, strategy, and one simple but powerful move: syncing her cloud. Before I tell you how I did it, let me pause here and ask you something. Imagine you're in my shoes. You see all the warning signs, the late nights, the guarded texts, the sudden coldness. What would you do? Would you confront your partner directly and risk being gaslight, told you're paranoid, made to feel crazy? Or would you wait, watch, and gather proof until you had no doubts left? Because that's exactly the choice I was faced with, and I made mine. And that choice, it changed everything. I started small. I noticed she used the same passcode for her laptop as she did for our shared streaming accounts. That gave me a thread to pull on. And once I tugged on that thread, the entire web started unraveling. But I'll be honest with you, it wasn't easy. It took nights of pretending to sleep while she texted someone under the covers. It took keeping a straight face during dinners when she smiled at me but her eyes flicked nervously toward her phone. And it took fighting the urge to demand answers before I was ready. Because when you're dealing with secrets this big, timing is everything. Now, let me make one thing crystal clear. This isn't a story about some cliché jealousy or petty snooping. This isn't just about checking messages for reassurance. This is about uncovering a truth that was deliberately buried, a truth that shook the foundation of my marriage, my family, and my sanity. And here's where I need you to lean in, because the moment I synced her cloud, that single decision, unlocked something I never could have prepared for. But before I tell you what I found, I want you to understand the atmosphere I was living in at that point. Picture this. Our home looked normal from the outside, the kind of house where neighbors waved at us, where kids rode bikes down the street, where we hosted barbecues in the summer. But inside, behind the closed doors, there was this invisible tension, like the air was thicker, harder to breathe. Every time my wife laughed at something on her phone, I wondered who was on the other end. Every time she left the room to grab something, I wondered if she was really grabbing a moment alone to text someone else. And every night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, asking myself how well I really knew the person sleeping next to me. And I know you feel that right now, don't you? That itch in your chest, that need to know, that curiosity pulling at you. That's why you clicked on this video in the first place, and I want to reassure you, you're not going to leave empty-handed. You're going to walk away knowing exactly what I discovered. because the ending of this story is something I still can't shake from my mind. The night I finally synced her cloud, I sat in the dark, alone in our living room, with only the glow of my laptop lighting the room. My hands were shaking, not just from fear of what I might find, but from fear of confirming what I already suspected. There's something terrifying about searching for the truth because once you find it, you can never go back to not knowing. You can't unsee what you've seen. You can't unknow what you've uncovered. And as the files began downloading, I knew my life was about to change forever. What I found that night shattered every illusion I had about my marriage. But I'm not going to give it away just yet, because I need you to stay with me through this journey, step by step, detail by detail, until you see it unfold the way I saw it. Only then will you understand the weight of what I uncovered, the magnitude of the secret my wife had been carrying, and why I can never look at her the same way again. So here's the truth. This isn't just a story about a hidden phone. It's about what happens when the person you trust most in this world becomes the person you fear knowing the truth about. And when I tell you what was on that cloud, when I show you the photos, the messages, the videos, I promise you, it's going to leave you with chills. Because I wasn't just uncovering secrets. I was uncovering a life I didn't even know she was living. And now we've arrived at the point where I have to leave you hanging, because the cliff we're standing on is about to break open beneath us. You're here because you want the truth. You're here because you feel that pull in your gut, the same one I felt in mine. And if you stay with me until the very end, I'll give you exactly what you came for, the full, unfiltered truth of what I found when I synced my wife's cloud. But I warn you, once you know it, you'll never look at your own relationships the same way again. Alright, let's pick up exactly where we left off, with you sitting in that dimly lit living room, laptop open, the files from your wife's hidden cloud beginning to trickle onto the screen. This continuation is written in long, natural paragraphs, no short or choppy lines, carefully layered with background, red herrings, and slow-burning tension. The glow of the laptop screen cast shadows across the living room, flickering off the framed photos that lined our walls. Pictures of birthdays, vacations, Christmas mornings, all smiling faces frozen in time, staring down at me as if mocking what I was about to uncover. It's strange, isn't it? How your own home, the place that's supposed to feel safe, can suddenly feel hostile once you start suspecting the person you share it with. As the files loaded, I kept glancing toward the stairs, half expecting my wife to walk down and catch me in the act, half praying she wouldn't. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure it would give me away. But before I reveal what appeared on that screen, I need you to understand the weeks that led me here, because this didn't come out of nowhere, and the cracks in our marriage didn't appear overnight. They had been forming quietly, in ways so subtle that I almost missed them. It all began a few months earlier, after we returned from a family trip to visit her parents. I remember that trip vividly, not because anything extraordinary happened, but because it was the first time I noticed how distracted she had become. Normally she was engaged, talkative, quick to laugh when her dad told one of his corny jokes, or when her mom started pulling out photo albums like she always did. But this time my wife seemed elsewhere. She kept checking her phone, retreating to the backyard to take calls, sometimes disappearing into her old bedroom with the door closed. I told myself she was just stressed, maybe work was piling up, maybe she was dealing with something privately. But the way she shut me out left me unsettled. And when we returned home, that distance followed us back. She started working late more often, claiming deadlines and meetings. But here's the thing, when you live with someone long enough, you know their routines. You know when they're actually tired, when they're truly focused, and when they're covering something up. I tried not to press her too hard at first, but the lies started slipping. She would say she was at the office, yet her car wasn't there when I drove past one evening. She told me she was grabbing drinks with coworkers, but none of her clothes smelled like alcohol, and her shoes weren't dusty from the bar downtown we both knew well. And if I'm being honest with you, part of me wanted to ignore all of this. Because once you pull on that thread, once you start asking those questions, you can't go back. You can't unknow the answers. And yet, there were times she was perfectly normal, laughing with our daughter, cooking dinner, even cuddling on the couch with me as if nothing was wrong. Those moments made me doubt myself. They made me wonder if I was overthinking, if I was letting paranoia get the best of me. And maybe that's how a lot of you feel when you notice the first signs that something is off with someone close to you. You second-guess yourself. You gaslight yourself before anyone else does. That's what I did until one night I caught something I couldn't ignore. I was taking out the trash late, and as I walked past her car, I noticed the faint blue glow of her phone lighting up the interior. She had left it in the glove compartment, locked, and when I leaned closer, I saw she had set it to Do Not Disturb. It struck me as odd. Who hides their phone away in the car unless they don't want it near the person they live with? That was the first time I thought about the possibility that there was someone else, some other number she didn't want me to see. But I pushed the thought away, telling myself maybe she just wanted space, maybe she was decompressing from work. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. Around that time, I started watching her more closely. I kept track of her moods, her excuses, her absences. I even confided in a friend of mine, Mark, who had gone through something similar. He told me straight up, if you think something's wrong, trust your gut. The worst mistake is ignoring your instincts. But here's where things get complicated. Mark had his own issues with trust, and he was always the first to assume the worst. So while his words stuck with me, I had to take them with caution. Was he being helpful, or was he projecting his own bitterness onto my situation? Already, my mind was spinning with suspects, and not just in the obvious way. Because you see, there were other changes too. She had started reconnecting with old friends on social media, names I didn't recognize popping up in her notifications. When I asked her about them, she brushed it off, saying, "Oh, just people from high school." But some of the messages I caught glimpses of didn't seem like old classmates catching up. They were longer, more personal. And when I asked to see, she tilted the screen away, smiling tightly, insisting it was nothing. That small action told me everything I needed to know. It wasn't nothing. And yet, not everything pointed to infidelity. There were moments that suggested something else entirely, maybe even something darker. She became paranoid in ways that didn't make sense, jumping when the doorbell rang, locking windows at night, glancing in the rearview mirror as though someone might be following her. At first, I thought she was just on edge from stress, but sometimes the fear in her eyes seemed too real, too raw, as if she was hiding from something, or someone. And that's when I started to consider another possibility. Maybe the secrets she was guarding weren't about cheating at all. Maybe they were about danger, something that could put all of us at risk. I kept trying to piece it together, but every time I thought I had the answer, something else threw me off balance. Like the time I overheard her whispering on the phone in the laundry room late at night, saying things like, "No, I can't tell him yet, and you don't understand, it's too dangerous." My stomach twisted hearing those words. Too dangerous? What could be too dangerous to tell your husband? Was she protecting me or deceiving me? Was there really another man, or was there some larger threat she was entangled in that I didn't know about? The red herrings piled up quickly. A coworker of hers who seemed unusually close, texting her late into the night. A neighbor who waved a little too eagerly when she walked by, his smile lingering longer than it should. Even her own sister, who had been distant with me lately, almost like she knew something she wasn't saying. Every person around us suddenly felt like they could be a suspect, like they might hold a piece of the puzzle I didn't yet understand. And the more I tried to figure it out, the less certain I became of anything. The tension in that room was unbearable as I waited, listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the creak of the house settling, every small sound amplified by the pounding of my heart. And then the first folder appeared on my screen, its name plain and ordinary, but the weight of it heavy enough to make my hands tremble. That was the moment I knew there was no going back, that whatever I found in those files would either confirm my worst fears or unravel them into something even more terrifying. And that's where I'll leave you for now, because the next step, the moment I actually opened that folder, is when the real mystery began to unfold. What was inside wasn't just a clue, it was the first glimpse into a secret that had been carefully constructed for months, a secret that pulled me into a maze of lies so twisted I didn't know who to believe anymore. When that first folder blinked open on the screen, I felt my chest tighten like I had just stepped into a room where the air had been sucked out. It wasn't even about the contents yet. It was about the realization that I was no longer dealing in suspicions or theories. I was about to confront facts, and facts have a way of stripping away the safety of doubt. But before I could fully dive into the images and messages spilling out in front of me, something happened that shifted everything. My phone buzzed on the table, startling me so much I nearly slammed the laptop shut. I glanced at the screen and froze. The text wasn't from my wife or from a friend, but from my sister. And the words she sent made the blood drain from my face. Asterisk, I just got a strange email. I mentioned you. Call me now. Asterisk. My hands shook as I dialed her number, glancing nervously toward the stairs as though my wife might appear at any moment. When my sister picked up, her voice was trembling. She explained that an anonymous email had landed in her inbox, with the subject line, Asterisk, do you really know who he's married to? Asterisk attached was a single image, blurry, almost like a screenshot taken in haste, but enough to make my sister feel uneasy. It was a picture of me and my wife at a family barbecue last summer, laughing in the backyard with a crowd behind us. There was nothing incriminating about it on its own, but the fact that someone outside our family had it, that they were sending it with a message that directly questioned my wife's identity, sent chills down my spine. It wasn't just me anymore. Someone was pulling other people into this, and that meant the circle of suspicion had grown wider than I imagined. This new thread complicated everything because until then, I had thought the secrets lived only between my wife and me. But if someone was contacting my sister, then clearly the story was bigger than what I had assumed. It made me rethink all the paranoia I had seen in my wife, the locked doors, the careful glances outside, the fear in her eyes. What if she wasn't just hiding something from me? What if she was hiding something from everyone? Suddenly, the late-night whispers I had overheard didn't sound like conversations with a lover. They sounded like warnings, negotiations, maybe even desperate attempts to keep danger at bay. That thought should have comforted me, but instead it terrified me more. Because if my wife was involved in something larger, that meant whoever sent my sister that message wasn't just playing games. They wanted me to start asking questions, and maybe they wanted me to fall into the same trap she was already caught in. I tried to calm my sister down, telling her it was probably spam or some twisted prank, but even as the words left my mouth I didn't believe them. The timing was too precise. The image was too personal. And the intent behind it was too sharp to ignore. After I hung up, I stared back at the screen, the folder of files from my wife's cloud still waiting for me, and for the first time I felt like I was being watched. Not just by her, not just by the people in our circle who might be keeping secrets, but by some unseen hand that had just made its presence known. It felt like I was no longer in control of the investigation. I was being pulled along by someone else's design. That night, my mind kept circling back to the same uneasy question. Who benefits from this? If my wife really was hiding an affair, why would someone go to the trouble of sending anonymous threats to my family? And if she was in danger, then who was orchestrating this chain of fear? The more I thought about it, the more everyone around me seemed suspicious. My sister swore she hadn't told anyone about the message except me, but how could I be sure? And why had she received it first instead of me? Was someone trying to split me away from the people I trusted, or was my sister's involvement a way of warning me that I was next? Meanwhile, I couldn't ignore the strange behaviors that continued to surface in my wife's orbit. A week earlier, one of her colleagues had stopped by unexpectedly to drop off papers while she wasn't home. I remembered the way he looked at me when I opened the door, his eyes searching as though he wanted to say something but thought better of it. He handed me the envelope without a word and left quickly, not even waiting for a thank you. At the time, I brushed it off as nothing, but now I wondered if he knew more than he let on. And then there was Jen across the street, the neighbor whose curtains twitched every time we stepped outside. Could she be the one sending the messages, collecting information, snapping photos without us realizing? The possibilities grew darker the more I thought about them, and each one pulled me further into a maze with no clear exit. Even family gatherings felt loaded now. At a recent dinner, my wife's sister Emily barely looked me in the eye. She whispered with my wife in the kitchen for long stretches, and when they came back out, both of them avoided talking about whatever it was. I caught snippets, words like "he can't know yet," and "it's too risky," but nothing that made sense out of context. At the time, I assumed they were talking about me, but after the message my sister received, I wasn't so sure anymore. Maybe they weren't conspiring against me. Maybe they were afraid of something else entirely. Or maybe that's exactly what they wanted me to think. The deeper I sank into this, the less sure I became of anything. Every clue contradicted the last. Every piece of evidence split into two possible meanings. The coworker could be a secret lover, or he could be trying to protect her. The neighbor could be spying, or she could be warning. My sister could be a victim of the same game, or she could be part of it. And at the center of it all was my wife, the person I thought I knew better than anyone, who now seemed like a stranger with 1,000 faces. As I sat back in that dim room, staring at the glowing folder on the screen and thinking about the message that had pulled my sister into this web, one thing became clear to me: this wasn't just about me anymore. Whatever was happening had ripples reaching into the people I loved, and the stakes were higher than I ever imagined. My instincts told me that once I opened those files fully, once I pieced them together with the new evidence, I'd be walking into a truth that no longer belonged to just my marriage. It was something bigger, something dangerous, and something I couldn't escape no matter how much I wanted to. The tension in that room was unbearable as I waited, listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the creak of the house settling, every small sound amplified by the pounding of my heart. And then the first folder appeared on my screen, its name plain and ordinary, but the weight of it heavy enough to make my hands tremble. That was the moment I knew there was no going back, that whatever I found in those files would either confirm my worst fears or unravel them into something even more terrifying. And that's where I'll leave you for now, because the next step, the moment I actually opened that folder, is when the real mystery began to unfold. What was inside wasn't just a clue, it was the first glimpse into a secret that had been carefully constructed for months, a secret that pulled me into a maze of lies so twisted I didn't know who to believe anymore. When that first folder blinked open on the screen, I felt my chest tighten like I had just stepped into a room where the air had been sucked out. It wasn't even about the contents yet, it was about the realization that I was no longer dealing in suspicions or theories. I was about to confront facts, and facts have a way of stripping away the safety of doubt. But before I could fully dive into the images and messages spilling out in front of me, something happened that shifted everything. My phone buzzed on the table, startling me so much I nearly slammed the laptop shut. I glanced at the screen and froze. The text wasn't from my wife or from a friend, but from my sister. And the words she sent made the blood drain from my face. Asterisk, I just got a strange email. I mentioned you. Call me now. Asterisk. My hands shook as I dialed her number, glancing nervously toward the stairs as though my wife might appear at any moment. When my sister picked up, her voice was trembling. She explained that an anonymous email had landed in her inbox, with the subject line, asterisk, do you really know who he's married to? Asterisk attached was a single image, blurry, almost like a screenshot taken in haste, but enough to make my sister feel uneasy. It was a picture of me and my wife at a family barbecue last summer, laughing in the backyard with a crowd behind us. There was nothing incriminating about it on its own, but the fact that someone outside our family had it, that they were sending it with a message that directly questioned my wife's identity, sent chills down my spine. It wasn't just me anymore. Someone was pulling other people into this, and that meant the circle of suspicion had grown wider than I imagined. This new thread complicated everything because until then, I had thought the secrets lived only between my wife and me. But if someone was contacting my sister, then clearly the story was bigger than what I had assumed. It made me rethink all the paranoia I had seen in my wife, the locked doors, the careful glances outside, the fear in her eyes. What if she wasn't just hiding something from me? What if she was hiding something from everyone? Suddenly, the late-night whispers I had overheard didn't sound like conversations with a lover. They sounded like warnings, negotiations, maybe even desperate attempts to keep danger at bay. That thought should have comforted me, but instead it terrified me more. Because if my wife was involved in something larger, that meant whoever sent my sister that message wasn't just playing games. They wanted me to start asking questions, and maybe they wanted me to fall into the same trap she was already caught in. I tried to calm my sister down, telling her it was probably spam or some twisted prank, but even as the words left my mouth I didn't believe them. The timing was too precise. The image was too personal. And the intent behind it was too sharp to ignore. After I hung up, I stared back at the screen, the folder of files from my wife's cloud still waiting for me, and for the first time I felt like I was being watched. Not just by her, not just by the people in our circle who might be keeping secrets, but by some unseen hand that had just made its presence known. It felt like I was no longer in control of the investigation. I was being pulled along by someone else's design. That night, my mind kept circling back to the same uneasy question. Who benefits from this? If my wife really was hiding an affair, why would someone go to the trouble of sending anonymous threats to my family? And if she was in danger, then who was orchestrating this chain of fear? The more I thought about it, the more everyone around me seemed suspicious. My sister swore she hadn't told anyone about the message except me, but how could I be sure? And why had she received it first instead of me? Was someone trying to split me away from the people I trusted, or was my sister's involvement a way of warning me that I was next? Meanwhile, I couldn't ignore the strange behaviors that continued to surface in my wife's orbit. A week earlier, one of her colleagues had stopped by unexpectedly to drop off papers while she wasn't home. I remembered the way he looked at me when I opened the door, his eyes searching as though he wanted to say something but thought better of it. He handed me the envelope without a word and left quickly, not even waiting for a thank you. At the time, I brushed it off as nothing, but now I wondered if he knew more than he let on. And then there was Jen across the street, the neighbor whose curtains twitched every time we stepped outside. Could she be the one sending the messages, collecting information, snapping photos without us realizing? The possibilities grew darker the more I thought about them, and each one pulled me further into a maze with no clear exit. Even family gatherings felt loaded now. At a recent dinner, my wife's sister Emily barely looked me in the eye. She whispered with my wife in the kitchen for long stretches, and when they came back out, both of them avoided talking about whatever it was. I caught snippets, words like "he can't know yet," and "it's too risky," but nothing that made sense out of context. At the time, I assumed they were talking about me, but after the message my sister received, I wasn't so sure anymore. Maybe they weren't conspiring against me. Maybe they were afraid of something else entirely. Or maybe that's exactly what they wanted me to think. The deeper I sank into this, the less sure I became of anything. Every clue contradicted the last. Every piece of evidence split into two possible meanings. The coworker could be a secret lover, or he could be trying to protect her. The neighbor could be spying, or she could be warning. My sister could be a victim of the same game, or she could be part of it. And at the center of it all was my wife, the person I thought I knew better than anyone, who now seemed like a stranger with 1,000 faces. As I sat back in that dim room, staring at the glowing folder on the screen and thinking about the message that had pulled my sister into this web, one thing became clear to me: this wasn't just about me anymore. Whatever was happening had ripples reaching into the people I loved, and the stakes were higher than I ever imagined. My instincts told me that once I opened those files fully, once I pieced them together with the new evidence, I'd be walking into a truth that no longer belonged to just my marriage. It was something bigger, something dangerous, and something I couldn't escape no matter how much I wanted to. And yet, even as that realization settled in, a new notification pinged on my laptop, one I hadn't expected, one that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't just my wife's files anymore. Another folder had appeared, one I hadn't synced, one I hadn't asked for. And the name of that folder was mine. The moment that second folder appeared with my name stamped across it, my body went cold, like all the air had been sucked out of the room. It was one thing to snoop into my wife's secrets. It was another to realize someone out there had been snooping into mine. My mind scrambled, trying to make sense of it. I hadn't synced anything under my name, hadn't created any folder like that, which meant it wasn't just her secrets being exposed. Someone was watching me too, and they wanted me to know it. That thought alone shook me deeper than anything I had uncovered so far, because it meant I wasn't the one in control of this search anymore. I had been feeling like the detective in my own marriage, but in reality, I was just another suspect in someone else's investigation. I couldn't bring myself to click the folder yet, not with the weight of my sister's phone call still hanging heavy in my chest. Instead, I shut the laptop quickly and pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes, trying to calm the racing thoughts. That was when I noticed the faint reflection in the darkened TV screen across from me. It was my own shape in the glow of the computer, but just beyond me through the window I thought I caught the glint of movement, like someone standing just outside watching. I turned quickly, but the street looked empty, only the faint orange wash of the streetlights falling across the quiet pavement. Still, my heart wouldn't slow down. The paranoia that had been simmering in the background all these months suddenly boiled over into something real and tangible. The next morning I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was exhausted, that shadows can play tricks on your mind, but the world around me was already shifting into something darker. On my way to work, I noticed a black sedan in my rearview mirror. It wasn't unusual at first, just another car on the road, but when it took the same 3 turns as me, lingered when I slowed, sped up when I did, the pit of dread in my stomach deepened. I pulled into a gas station just to test my nerves, and sure enough, the car rolled slowly past, the driver's face hidden behind the glare of the windshield. It could have been nothing, but when you're already knee-deep in secrets, nothing feels like nothing anymore. Every detail becomes evidence, every coincidence feels deliberate. By the time I reached work, my hands were trembling on the steering wheel. I sat in the parking lot longer than usual, staring at the entrance, trying to force myself to breathe normally. That was when I checked my phone and saw a new message, one that made me nearly drop the device. It wasn't from my sister, not from my wife, but from an unknown number. The message was short, simple, and sharp as a knife. Asterisk, stop digging or she won't be the only one hiding. Asterisk, my stomach turned because the wording wasn't vague, it was targeted. Whoever sent it knew what I was doing, knew I was digging into my wife's secrets, and now they were threatening me directly. I sat there frozen, staring at the words, replaying them over and over. Stop digging. Or she won't be the only one hiding. Did that mean my wife was hiding because of them? Did that mean they had forced her into secrecy? Or did it mean that if I kept pressing, I'd be the one who disappeared next? The ambiguity was suffocating, and yet there was no mistaking the urgency. This wasn't a paranoid fantasy anymore. Someone out there was pulling the strings, and they wanted me to feel the leash tighten around my neck. The rest of the day passed in a blur, but my paranoia only grew sharper. Every phone call I got at work felt like it had another voice lurking on the line. Every unfamiliar face in the office looked like someone planted there to watch me. I found myself glancing at the windows constantly, expecting to see that same black sedan parked across the street. By the time I drove home, exhaustion weighed me down, but it was fear that pushed me forward. I needed answers, but I also knew that every step closer to the truth meant stepping further into danger. That night, things escalated even more. I came home to find the house dark, which was strange because my wife always left at least one light on. The silence pressed against me as I stepped inside, calling her name softly, half expecting her to answer from upstairs. But there was nothing. The kitchen was untouched, no dinner in progress, no shoes by the door, no sound of running water. I moved through each room, my footsteps heavy against the wood floors, my chest tightening with each unanswered call of her name. And then I reached the bedroom where I found her phone sitting neatly on the nightstand, unlocked, screen dark, but there. My heart sank because if her phone was here, then where was she? I picked it up, hoping for some kind of clue, but the device buzzed almost immediately in my hand. A new notification slid across the screen, but it wasn't a text or an email. It was a calendar alert for an event titled *Deadline. The time stamped on it was now. At that exact moment, the house phone rang downstairs, the shrill sound splitting the silence, and I swear my knees almost buckled under me. No one ever used that phone anymore, not even telemarketers. I stumbled down to grab it, my breath caught in my throat, and when I pressed it to my ear, the line was quiet at first. Just static like the crackle of an old radio. And then a voice, low, distorted, and unrecognizable, spoke 5 words that made my blood run cold. You're already in too deep. I stood there, gripping the receiver so tightly my knuckles went white, but before I could respond, the line went dead. The silence that followed felt heavier than the voice itself, and I realized with bone-deep certainty that my life had crossed into a threshold I couldn't step back from. My wife was missing, someone was watching me, and the threats weren't just about secrets anymore, they were about survival. I felt it in my bones. I wasn't just looking for answers now, I was being hunted for daring to ask the questions. And as I stood there in the dark, the house silent around me, the phone still warm in my hand, I realized something that made the fear sink even deeper. If someone out there had gone to such lengths to control this story, then maybe I wasn't just uncovering my wife's hidden life. Maybe I was uncovering a truth that was never meant to see the light of day, a truth that could swallow both of us whole. I stood in that silence with the dead phone pressed against my ear, my whole body trembling like I had just walked off a cliff and was waiting to hit the ground. I wanted to call my wife's name again, to convince myself she was simply in the next room, but the eerie stillness of the house told me otherwise. I kept replaying that distorted voice in my head, those 5 words that felt more like a sentence than a warning, and the weight of it gnawed at me until I could barely breathe. I went back upstairs, back to her phone on the nightstand, hoping I had missed something earlier. My hands shook as I scrolled through her messages and her photos, but most of them seemed normal. Pictures of our daughter, texts about groceries, reminders about appointments. That's when I noticed a small detail, one so ordinary at first glance that I almost skipped over it. There was a hidden album, buried inside the photo library, labeled simply with a single letter, E. When I opened it, my heart nearly stopped. It wasn't filled with pictures of strangers or suspicious places like I expected. It was filled with pictures of me. Dozens of them. Some taken years ago, some recent. Some in our home, some when I was out running errands, a few from moments I didn't even realize anyone had been near me. There was one of me walking into my office building, one of me at a gas station, another of me sitting in traffic, my face half lit by the glow of the dashboard. The angles were off, like they'd been taken from far away, maybe even from inside another car. And then the realization hit me harder than anything I had uncovered before. These weren't photos my wife could have taken. These were photos someone else had been collecting. I staggered back from the bed, the phone nearly slipping from my hand. If these pictures were in her hidden album, then she must have known about them. Did that mean she was working with whoever had been following me? Or had she been keeping them as evidence, hiding them away because she was scared of what they meant? My head spun with the possibilities, and every scenario was worse than the last. For the first time since this all began, I realized maybe my wife hadn't been lying to me out of betrayal. Maybe she had been lying to me out of protection. That was when I heard the front door open downstairs. My first instinct was panic. Whoever had been watching us, whoever had called the house, maybe they were here now. I grabbed the phone tight in my hand, moving slowly to the top of the stairs, my chest pounding. But the voice that drifted up wasn't distorted, wasn't unfamiliar. It was my sister's. She called my name softly, nervously, like she already knew something was wrong. Relief flooded me for a second, but it vanished the moment I saw her face. She looked pale, shaken, clutching her own phone like it was a weapon. She told me she had gotten another email, one that went beyond the blurred family photo from before. This one contained a message that made my stomach twist into knots. He doesn't know the truth. He never has. You need to tell him. Attached to it was a scanned document, grainy but legible. And as she held the phone out to me, I saw what it was. A birth certificate. Not my wife's. Not my daughter's. Mine. And it didn't have the name of the parents I had known all my life. It had names I didn't recognize. I felt like the floor dropped out from under me. For years I thought this was about her secrets, her phone, her cloud, her hidden life. But now, staring at that document, I realized the game was bigger and I wasn't just the investigator, I was part of the mystery itself. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths not only to expose my wife's secrets but to unravel mine. The paranoia, the threats, the photos, it wasn't just about what she was hiding. It was about who I really was and why I had been blind to it all this time. My sister's voice broke through my thoughts, shaky and urgent. She admitted she had known pieces of this for a while, that our parents had confided in her before they passed, but she had never told me because she thought it was better left buried. She said my wife had somehow stumbled across it, maybe through a stray document or a conversation she wasn't supposed to hear, and that was when the strange behavior began. She wasn't hiding an affair. She was hiding my past, from me. I sank into the chair at the edge of the bed, my heart racing as everything I thought I understood about my life began to collapse in on itself. All those nights she had looked scared, all those moments she whispered on the phone, all those late drives that didn't add up, they weren't about another man, they were about me. About the truth she was holding back, a truth that had now caught up with both of us in ways I couldn't begin to comprehend. But just as I tried to process it, my sister's phone buzzed again. Another email, another message, this one even clearer than before. It said, *, he's starting to remember. Make sure he doesn't. *, my stomach twisted as I read it because the way it was written, it wasn't a threat aimed at my wife anymore. It was aimed at me. And in that moment, everything I thought I knew shattered completely. Maybe I wasn't just searching for my wife's secrets. Maybe I was searching for my own. The weight of that last message hung between my sister and me like a storm cloud ready to break. * he's starting to remember. Make sure he doesn't. *, the words were suffocating, not only because they were so specific but because they implied two things I couldn't come to terms with. First, that someone out there believed I had memories locked away that even I couldn't access, and second, that my own sister might be involved in keeping those memories buried. I looked at her, searching her face for any hint of betrayal, but what I saw instead was guilt, a raw, trembling guilt that told me she knew more than she had admitted. My chest tightened as I realized I was now faced with an impossible choice. Do I press her for the truth, risk breaking the fragile trust we had left, or do I play along, pretend I believe she's just as much a victim as I am, in hopes of keeping her close enough to reveal what she's really hiding? Every fiber of me wanted to shout, to demand answers, but another part of me, the part that had been growing sharper with paranoia, knew that losing her cooperation could be dangerous. If she was in on it, even partly, pushing too hard could turn her against me. And if she wasn't, then my accusations would only shatter the one lifeline I had left. The silence between us stretched painfully long, and finally she broke it with a shaky whisper. You don't understand, I was trying to protect you. Protect me from what? The question burned on my tongue, but before I could voice it, another sound cut through the house, a sharp knock at the front door that made us both jump. It wasn't the kind of knock neighbors made. It was heavy, deliberate, echoing like a warning. My sister's eyes widened and she shook her head, motioning for me not to move. But the knock came again, louder this time, followed by a pause, then 3 slow taps that felt rehearsed, coded. My skin prickled with fear. Whoever was out there wasn't delivering packages or checking in out of kindness. They knew we were inside and they weren't leaving until we acknowledged it. My sister gripped my arm so tightly it hurt, her voice barely above a whisper as she said, If you open that door, you'll regret it. You have to choose right now. Do you want the truth or do you want to survive this? It was the kind of choice that freezes you in place because either answer feels like betrayal. If I chose survival, if I stepped back and let the moment pass, I might never uncover what my wife had been hiding, what my sister clearly knew, what that folder with my name on it was waiting to reveal. But if I chose truth, if I swung the door open to confront whatever danger stood outside, there was no telling what I'd be inviting into my home, into my life, into the fragile web of lies I was only beginning to untangle. And the worst part was the gnawing fear that maybe those two choices weren't separate at all. Maybe seeking the truth was the very thing that would cost me my safety. As the knocks turned into a pounding rhythm that rattled the frame of the house, my phone buzzed again in my pocket. This time it wasn't an email or a blocked number, it was a video message. My hands trembled as I opened it, and what I saw nearly brought me to my knees. The footage showed my wife, seated in what looked like a dim, unfamiliar room. Her face was pale, her eyes darting toward the camera with a mix of fear and warning. She didn't speak, but she held up a piece of paper with words scrawled in thick black ink. Asterisk, don't trust her. Asterisk. I turned to my sister, the phone still in my hand, and the expression on her face was one I'll never forget. Shock, fear, and something else, something I couldn't quite place, flashed across her features. She started to stammer, reaching for me, but the pounding at the door grew even more violent, shaking the hinges. I backed away, torn between the woman I had shared a life with, who was begging me from the shadows not to trust, and the sister who stood right in front of me, pleading with her eyes for me to believe she was on my side. It felt like the walls were closing in, the choice pressing down on me with unbearable weight. Confront my sister and risk burning the only bridge I had left, or defy the warning from my wife and hold on to the one person standing beside me in that moment. And then the pounding stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise, a silence so deep it rang in my ears. Whoever was out there hadn't left, they were waiting. Watching. Forcing me to decide whether I'd cling to the safety of denial or rip open the door to whatever truth lay outside. My sister whispered again, this time her voice breaking with desperation. Please don't do this. If you choose her, you won't survive. Her words cut through me like glass because they weren't just a warning, they were an ultimatum. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized the true cost of chasing answers. I couldn't have both the truth and safety. I had to sacrifice one to keep the other. And as I stood there, torn between blood and marriage, between the past I didn't understand and the present unraveling around me, my hand slowly reached toward the doorknob. I didn't know if I was choosing life or death, loyalty or betrayal. All I knew was that the next move would either save me, or end everything I thought I knew forever. My hand lingered on the doorknob, sweat slicking my palm as if the wood itself radiated heat. The house was silent again, but it was the kind of silence that wasn't empty. It was listening, waiting, baiting me into making the next move. My sister's voice was a desperate whisper behind me, begging me to step back, to trust her, but my wife's face was still burned into my mind from that video message, pale and terrified, holding up those 4 words. Don't trust her. The weight of that warning pressed against my chest like a vice, and in that moment I realized there was no safe choice. Either way, I was about to step into something irreversible. So I turned the knob. The door swung open into darkness. No delivery man, no stranger, no neighbor waiting awkwardly on the porch. Instead, sitting neatly at the threshold was a small black envelope, thick and heavy, as though whoever left it knew exactly how much fear it would provoke. I picked it up with trembling fingers, tearing it open in the dim light of the hall, and what spilled out made my knees buckle. Inside were photographs, dozens of them just like the ones I had found on my wife's hidden album. But these weren't just of me. They were of my sister, my boss, my neighbor across the street, even David, my wife's co-worker. Everyone connected to me was there, their faces caught in candid moments that could only be explained by someone watching, following, documenting. It wasn't just about my marriage anymore. This was bigger, sprawling, organized. It was a conspiracy that had swallowed my entire life and everyone I thought I knew. I staggered back as I shuffled through the photos, my hands shaking harder with each one. Some showed my wife speaking with people I had never seen before. Men in suits, strangers in parking lots, a woman with a red scarf whose face was always turned just slightly away from the camera. Other photos were darker, more unsettling. Shots of my daughter walking home from school, my sister standing alone outside her office, even me asleep in bed. Whoever was behind this wasn't just following us. They were inside our lives, close enough to brush against us in the dark without being seen. And that realization broke something inside me because it meant this wasn't a random threat or a single stalker. This was an operation. And I had been at the center of it the whole time. I turned to my sister, demanding an explanation, but her reaction only twisted the knife deeper. She didn't look shocked at the photos. She didn't even look surprised. She just looked tired, like a weight she had been carrying for too long had finally come crashing down. And when she finally spoke, her words cut deeper than any betrayal I had ever imagined. I told you not to open that door. You weren't supposed to know this way. My voice cracked as I pressed her for answers, my mind unraveling with fury and disbelief. How long had she known? Was she the one feeding them information? Was she the reason my wife had vanished, the reason my daughter's face was in those photos? She tried to reach for me, her voice trembling as she said, "It's not what you think. It was never about hurting you. It was about keeping you safe from who you really are." But her words only made the panic worse, because they confirmed what I feared most. She had been part of this all along. The pounding started again, this time not at the door but at the windows, the walls, the very frame of the house. Shadows shifted outside, multiple figures moving quickly, surrounding us. I could hear muffled voices, sharp commands, the crunch of boots on gravel. It wasn't just one person watching. There were many. They had been waiting for this moment, for me to open that door and step into their trap. My sister grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin as she hissed, "You need to choose right now. Come with me and trust me, or stay here and you'll never see her again." My chest heaved as I looked at her, at the sister I had grown up with, the sister who had been my anchor through so many storms, now standing in front of me as part of the very web that had torn my life apart. My wife's message echoed in my head, telling me not to trust her. But my sister's grip was iron, her voice fierce with urgency. "They won't let you walk away from this. They want you because of what you know, because of who you are. You're not who you think you are, and if you don't come with me right now, they'll make sure you never find out the truth." The house rattled with pressure from outside, every knock and scrape a reminder that the walls were closing in. The betrayal, the lies, the half-truths, all of it came crashing down at once, and I realized the scale of this nightmare was so much bigger than a hidden phone or a cloud account. This wasn't about a marriage falling apart. This was about an entire life built on secrets, and I was standing at the epicenter of a conspiracy that had been carefully constructed around me for years. Everyone I trusted was compromised, and every choice I made could mean life or death. I looked at the photos scattered across the floor, at the images of the people I loved being watched like prey, and I felt the panic twist into something sharper, something closer to resolve. The truth was no longer optional. It was a weapon, and if I didn't claim it, someone else would. But as I met my sister's eyes, filled with desperation and guilt, I knew that whatever I chose next would decide everything. Whether I uncovered the truth of who I was and why I had been hunted, or whether I disappeared into the same darkness that had already swallowed my wife. And with the walls shaking around me and the voices outside closing in, I realized I only had seconds to decide. The walls shook with every pounding knock, the shadows shifting across the curtains as if a dozen people were moving outside, waiting for the signal to come crashing in. My sister's hand still clamped around my arm, her nails biting into my skin, her eyes filled with urgency but also something I couldn't ignore anymore, fear. It wasn't just fear of them breaking in, it was fear of me, of what I might do once I understood the scale of what had been unfolding around me. My chest tightened as I realized this wasn't about protecting me from some faceless threat. This was about controlling me, about keeping me in a role I hadn't even realized I was playing. I looked down at the photographs scattered across the floor, the snapshots of people I loved being followed, watched, cataloged like evidence in some ongoing case. My wife, my daughter, my co-workers, my neighbors, all of them were tangled in this web, and the truth hit me like ice water down my spine. This conspiracy wasn't orbiting around me, I was orbiting around it. The urgency grew unbearable as the noises outside escalated. Voices shouted commands in unison, boots scraped against gravel, something metallic clinked like a weapon being cocked. Whoever they weren't just watching anymore, they were preparing to move. My sister pulled me closer, whispering through clenched teeth, "You don't understand, they've been preparing you for this your whole life. That's why she's gone, that's why they're watching everyone. They're trying to force you to remember." Her words were jagged, rushed, almost incoherent, but they sliced through me with an intensity one couldn't dismiss. My entire body ached with questions, but before I could demand answers, the front window shattered inward with a crack that shook the entire frame of the house. Glass rained across the floor, and from the corner of my eye I saw shadows begin to pour inside. My sister shoved me toward the back of the house, her face pale and desperate, but I yanked away, my fury boiling over. "Tell me the truth now, or I'm not moving another step." My voice cracked with rage and fear, and for the first time, she looked at me not as her brother but as someone who had become dangerous to her. Her silence was answer enough. I backed away, my heart pounding so hard I thought my ribs might break. And then the ultimate betrayal unfolded. She pulled a phone from her pocket, one I hadn't seen before, and spoke into it with calm precision. "He knows. We're bringing him in now." The words hit me harder than the breaking glass. My own sister, the one person I thought I could cling to in this chaos, was not just hiding the truth, she was part of the machine orchestrating it. My entire world tilted in that instant. Every warning, every plea, every moment she begged me to trust her was nothing more than a tactic to guide me exactly where they wanted me. And the worst part was the dawning realization that my wife's message, her pale face holding that piece of paper that said "Don't trust her," hadn't been paranoia. It had been the one true warning I should have listened to from the start. The back door burst open and figures poured in, dressed in dark clothing, faces obscured, movements precise like they had rehearsed this moment for years. I stumbled backward, caught between rage and terror, watching as my sister calmly stepped aside, aligning herself with them. She didn't flinch when one of them pressed a hand to her shoulder, like she belonged to them, like she had been waiting for this reunion. My blood turned cold. This wasn't her being manipulated. She had been with them all along. I shouted her name, demanded to know why, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. Instead, she spoke the words that would haunt me long after that night, because you were never supposed to find out who you really are. And if you keep pushing, they'll destroy everyone you love to keep it that way. The soldiers, or whatever they were, began to close in around me, and every instinct screamed at me to fight, to run, to do anything but surrender. Yet the weight of her words pinned me in place, because somewhere beneath the betrayal was a horrifying grain of truth. This wasn't about protecting me from my wife's secrets or some petty family drama. This was about erasing something buried deep inside me, something dangerous enough that an entire network of people, including my own blood, had dedicated their lives to keeping it hidden. The figures moved closer, and one of them reached for me, but before they could touch me, another sound cut through the chaos. A sharp bang from upstairs, followed by a flash of light. For a heartbeat, the intruders froze, their heads snapping toward the staircase. And then, like a phantom, my wife appeared at the top of the stairs, her hair wild, her face bruised but her eyes blazing with defiance. She was holding something in her hand, not a weapon but a small drive, the kind you plug into a computer. She raised it high, her voice shaking but steady as she shouted, "He deserves to know the truth. And if you don't let him, I'll release everything." The room erupted. The intruders surged forward, some toward her, some toward me. My sister screamed her name, begging her to stop, but the look on my wife's face was pure fury, a fire I had never seen before. The scale of the conspiracy unfolded right there in my living room. This wasn't about infidelity or paranoia or even my own marriage. This was about information, something buried so deep that entire groups of people had been mobilized to suppress it. My wife had been hiding from me not to deceive me, but to protect me from becoming a pawn in their war. And now, with her standing there holding the one piece of leverage that could unravel everything, I realized I was standing on the edge of something far bigger than myself. The truth wasn't just about my wife or my family. It was about an entire system of lies stretching beyond the walls of my home, beyond my life, reaching into something far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. And in that instant, with enemies closing in, with betrayal revealed and the one person I thought I'd lost standing defiant above them all, I knew I had seconds to act. My next choice would either ignite the truth or bury it forever. The chaos of that night blurred into flashes, boots pounding across the floor, shouts tearing through the air, my wife's defiant voice rising above them all as she clutched the small drive like it was the only thing standing between us and oblivion. I don't remember every detail of the fight, only the surge of adrenaline that carried me forward when I saw her cornered at the top of the stairs, the raw instinct that told me if I didn't move, if I didn't stand by her, it would all be over. I remember the weight of my sister's eyes on me as she tried to pull me back, her face carved with regret, torn between blood and loyalty to something I could never truly understand. And I remember the moment the drive slipped from my wife's hand, crashing to the floor between us, and all of us froze like the entire world was holding its breath, because inside that small piece of plastic and metal was the truth we had all been orbiting around without ever touching. That was when I realized the truth wasn't something fragile, it was a weapon, and whoever claimed it would control everything that happened next. Somehow in that fractured moment the noise stopped. The shouting quieted, the pounding boots slowed, and it was like everyone in that room was waiting for me to make the choice. My sister whispered my name like a plea, her face streaked with tears, while my wife's gaze locked on mine, steady and unyielding, daring me to trust her after everything that had happened. And in that silence I bent down, picked up the drive, and for the first time in months, felt clarity pierce through the fog of paranoia. The drive wasn't about them, it was about me. About my life, my past, the conspiracy that had wrapped itself around my family like a noose. I didn't need anyone to explain it anymore. I needed to decide if I wanted the truth, even if it destroyed everything, or if I wanted to hand it over and live the rest of my life as someone else's puppet. When the dust finally settled, when the strangers in dark clothing had retreated into the night with the knowledge that they had lost control of the moment, it was just the three of us left, me, my wife, and my sister. The air between us was thick with betrayal and love and questions that might never be fully answered. My wife collapsed into my arms, shaking, whispering apologies for the secrets she kept, but I held her tighter because deep down I understood now that her lies had been born from fear, from a desperate need to protect me from the truth I wasn't ready to face. My sister stood apart, her face unreadable, torn between guilt and relief, and in her silence I saw the truth that would haunt me long after that night. She had been part of it, yes, but part of her had always been trying to shield me too. We weren't enemies. We were prisoners of the same secret, just playing different roles in a game we never agreed to join. The weeks that followed blurred together as we tried to stitch together something resembling normal life. The drive contained pieces of the story, fragments of files and documents that hinted at a network older and deeper than I could fully comprehend. Records of surveillance stretching back decades, names and places that tied into my past in ways that made my skin crawl. I learned that the parents who raised me weren't my biological parents, that my birth was tied to a program I still don't fully understand, a program that marked me before I ever had a chance to choose who I wanted to be. It explained the photographs, the constant watching, the reason why my life had been shadowed by eyes I never saw. But it didn't answer the one question that kept me awake at night. Why me? Why my family? Why had they built this elaborate cage of secrets around my life? The truth, as much of it as I could piece together, was enough to give me clarity but not enough to give me peace. My wife and I tried to rebuild, but nothing was ever simple after that night. Trust became something fragile, easily broken, and though I loved her fiercely for fighting to keep me safe, I couldn't ignore the way her eyes sometimes drifted toward the windows at night, as if expecting shadows to return. My sister disappeared not long after, leaving behind only a note that said she was sorry and that some truths were better left buried. I never heard from her again, and part of me still wonders if she left by choice or if someone made that choice for her. And yet, life has a way of moving forward even when you're carrying ghosts. I still go to work, still tuck my daughter into bed, still smile at the neighbors as though nothing ever happened. But every time I hear the crunch of gravel outside my house, every time my phone buzzes with an unknown number, every time I catch my reflection in a darkened window, I remember. I remember the photos, the voices, the betrayal, and the weight of that drive in my hand. I remember that my life isn't as ordinary as it looks, that there are still pieces of myself I don't fully understand, and that somewhere out there, someone is still watching, waiting for me to dig too deep again. So here's the truth I can share, the one lesson carved into me after everything that happened. Sometimes the answers we're chasing aren't what set us free, they're what bind us tighter. And sometimes the people we think we can't trust are the very ones standing between us and the darkness. My wife hid her phone for months and I thought it was the start of the end. But what I found when I synced her cloud wasn't the unraveling of our marriage. It was the unraveling of a life I thought was mine, a life built on secrets so deep they still haunt me every time I close my eyes. And maybe that's the cruelest twist of all. The truth didn't give me closure, it gave me a choice. To live with it or to let it consume me. I chose to live. But deep down, I know this story isn't finished. The shadows haven't disappeared. They're just waiting for the right moment to return. And when they do, I'll be ready. Or at least, I tell myself I will be. Because after everything, one question still lingers in the back of my mind, the one I can't silence no matter how hard I try. If they went to such extraordinary lengths to hide who I am, then what exactly is it that they're so afraid I'll remember?